supply chain,
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 supply chain.
Supply Chain Management with GDP Season 2, and this time it's bigger and it's better. We will pick up from where we left off and continue to discuss industry best practices, current affairs, effective leadership, and the latest innovations in the world of supply chain. The podcast is aimed at explaining the concepts of supply chain in the leanest way possible, one of the most efficient shows where you will listen to me covering through various important topics across the supply chain domain. I'm your host, Gagandeep Prabhu, currently working at Ernst & Young in their supply chain and operations consulting practice. So let's just jump right into it then. Hi everyone. Welcome to another episode of Supply Chain Management with GDP. And this episode actually brings us to the midpoint of our season for this year. So pretty exciting, and thought we would cover a topic which I've spoken quite a bit over the last few episodes, as well as in the previous season when a lot of the people who came onto the podcast talked about this. What is diversified supply chain? Or how do you achieve supply chain diversity? So supply chain diversity is manufacturing business terminology used to describe the act of increasing choices when you order what supplies from whoever supplies these products. It describes the abundance and flexibility for a certain product. As in any business decision, there are advantages and disadvantages to having more or less diversification in a supply chain. That is, for example, if you need a certain product and you need this certain part or you need the certain raw material to manufacture your product, you have multiple suppliers supplying the same or similar product, so which can go into your product. Now, supply chain diversification is not a simple method of making suppliers compete with each other, for the best price. It is more about preparing the supply chain to be flexible in response to pressures in the marketplace or in global conditions. A really good example of this is the COVID-19 global pandemic that happened in 2020 and that's been impacting the supply chains for the past 2 years. A lot of product manufacturers were not diverse in terms that they had one good relationship or two good relationship with suppliers, especially if they were from China, were instantly impacted when the pandemic came through because China shut down. The marketplaces were closed. The factories were closed. There was no raw materials being manufactured. Without these raw materials, companies couldn't produce their products. So that's when they realized that, hey, we actually should have diversified our supply chain. Now, when diversifying your supply chain, this is one question that arises or is being propped up when I talk about is, what do you do with your old suppliers as soon as you're diversifying it? Do you focus on the newer suppliers more? Or what happens to the older suppliers, the relationship that you had? And I always say this simply because your supply chain is diversified, which doesn't occur overnight, your legacy supplier shouldn't be thrown off or should be constantly involved throughout the transition phases. In most cases, the legacy supplier will remain as the primary supplier, even after the diversification, as there's a usually good reason why they became an original supplier. Now, coming to the risks in supply chain, there are several risks associated in supply chain continuity. It could range from all the way from politics, electronic attacks, economy, or even natural disasters or something like a global pandemic. All of these things can disrupt the supply chain if you don't have a very robust supply chain. This can disrupt your business as well as impact the operations day over day, including customer delivery, and cost money and resources and time to your business. However, with a supply chain diversified, you can mitigate these risks by ensuring you have a solid supplier base to your business. Nevertheless, it also optimizes risk management And also, you can be strategic while choosing your suppliers. Now, one good example that I always lean to when I talk about diversifying your supply chain is assume that you have a startup. Let's say your startup is about manufacturing some home goods, and your customers are generally homemakers who order these things in retail. That is, they most probably order one or two of these products. And you're heavily reliant on logistics providers such as UPS, USPS, or FedEx to deliver these products across America. Assume that one of these logistics providers has an issue with their operations and they completely shut down. Let's say you were only reliant on UPS and UPS completely shuts down its operations. Now, you can't pivot in the last moment to USPS, try to get quotes from them, try to get down a better contract. Or you can't pivot in the middle of your operations to go to FedEx and try to understand what is their policies, what their pricing are, because anything drafted at the last moment will cost you more than what you're actually paying. So the best way would have been at the start itself to have diversified your logistics providers, where you use all of these services or even other services that you can find to deliver your products. Diversified based on regional ratings, maybe based on demographics. Maybe FedEx provides cheaper service when you ship from the East Coast to the West Coast, but while UPS provides cheaper shipping when you ship it locally in your area. So these are the factors that you could include while looking at your service providers, which in turn ensures your supply chain is diversified. So that was about diversifying supply chains. Thank you for tuning in to all the listeners to diversify your knowledge about supply chain. Yeah, a small joke from my end before I leave. But hope you have a good rest of the day and thank you for tuning in.